This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today we are welcoming back Cosimo Libardo to the Daily Coffee Pro. Cosimo, thank you for coming back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
A lot has changed in the world of coffee since you were on the podcast last. A lot has changed in your world.
Too much.
And so today starts the first in a 5-part series. We're going to talk about the viability of cafes and coffee roasting businesses in today's market, because since we were having a conversation on the podcast last, we've had a pandemic. We've had many issues with the coffee supply chain. We're on the doorstep of an energy crisis as well as a financial crisis. And the labor situation in our industry is causing us to have to rethink the business models in the coffee industry for small businesses as well as for the bigger businesses. So in today's episode, we're going to focus specifically on profitability. But before we get started, why don't you remind everybody who you are and all the genius things that you've done in this industry?
Well, I'm a dinosaur of the coffee industry in many ways. Started in this industry 25 years ago. But I'm very driven by innovation. What I like about the industry is the coffee in general is it's definitely the fact that there is a lot of room for improvement. And that's been an opportunity that I've seen through times. And there is still now, just in a different direction, in my opinion. We'll talk about it later. This opportunity still exists. So innovation is what I've liked to do, other than I'm good, or I think I'm decent at managing businesses. I've been involved with a few of them. Just to mention a few: Victoria Arduino, the Black Eagle, Mythos One, the WBC. Then I have become president of the Specialty Coffee Association of Europe, been CEO of Toby's Estate Coffee in Australia, became CEO of Carimali. Now I'm consulting for Barista, which is a new brand of the CMA Group, which is the current sponsor of the WBC. So I'll see you all in Melbourne when I get there the end of this month. And then I am still on the board of the SCA, and I am also the incoming treasurer of
Congratulations.
The SCA.
That just got announced.
Thank you.
So the reason I'm a big fan of yours is because when you go into a business, the way I came across this guy called Cosimo was because I noticed some things were starting to shift in Toby's estate in a very thoughtful and intentional way. And I got to know you as the kind of leader, as I was watching from afar, as somebody who wasn't scared to challenge things, but you challenged in a considerate and thoughtful way that drove a business into a direction that revitalized the brand again and made it relevant again. And so I'm a big fan of that behavior. Not such a big fan of WBC. That's fine. We can agree to disagree on that side of things. But everything that I know about you with regards to the way that you approach business is about thoughtful innovation. And again, you're not scared to question things. So in today's conversation, and in this series actually, I want to unpack the viability of small businesses today, because a lot of people go out there and talk about how you should definitely open a cafe and you should definitely open a roastery. And while that may have been true in the 90s and the early noughties, I think it's a little bit dangerous to just push people towards opening small businesses today in such a volatile space. The question I have for you is, are cafes and coffee roasteries profitable today?
Well, it's an interesting question because I think it varies by country and where you are. Right now,
Hmm.
also, if you are in Europe, the price of energy and gas is becoming three, four,
Mm.
7, 10 times what it was. So imagine roasting with gas.
Yeah,
It's
it's
I
gonna
don't know how
bury you.
long will well, this is becoming a major
Mm.
economic crisis for Europe. And that's where I say these things happen, though. It's part of humanity.
Right.
Wars, scarcity of resources, we're too many on this planet. These are things that, if you look at from with the eye of an economist,
Hmm.
are things that were kind of predictable in many ways. These tensions will always exist in cycles. Uh,
Hmm.
the point is understanding if this tension is just a short time, few months, or if it's a longer term. That will change how things work for
Hmm.
people, will change behaviors and reshape all industries if that happens. We want to think that this is a peak of a crisis that will last a few more months and then will be normalized also by demand, because people will reduce demand in any case. So the price cannot stay high just artificially.
Mm.
And with hyper profits from certain companies, governments will not let all their economic systems collapse. I don't think that. I mean, the alternative to that will be a rather war than letting everything sink. I don't. It's not predictable. But let's go away from the macroeconomic
Hmm.
and scenarios of our impossible future, and let's focus on coffee.
Hmm.
The two things that are driving right now, I would not recommend someone to get into coffee unless they have a specific recipe for what they're doing. The problem with the coffee industry is that the barriers of entry and the barriers of exit are very low, very
Mm.
low. It's capital, there is certain capital needed, but it's not the most capital intensive business,
Hmm.
sometimes founded by the roasters. So you give it a go. There are countries like Italy where the roaster used to pay for everything. There are places in Australia that still get everything
Hmm.
from the roasters. There are certain roasters that don't want to do that. I do like the roasters that don't subsidize their customers with
Yep.
everything, because that's not, you're not teaching them how to be business people. And
Hmm.
that's another problem that I see in which will change. There was a roaster in Naples that was interviewed many years ago. There was a big program on TV on coffee and how all the stuff that wasn't working in Italy. And this roaster in Naples says, I made a deal with the bank. I won't be a bank and they won't be a roaster. So the bank does the bank, the roaster does the roaster.
I wish we could clip that
So
and send that to every roaster on the planet that's being told by coffee espresso machine manufacturing companies that they should be a distributor for their machines, because the business model has been broken for a very long time and it's
look,
now deemed
I don't
non-competitive.
I don't know if the espresso machine companies are happy about that, because they get stressed on the price, because what happens is that price becomes an issue. Espresso machine companies like to sell more expensive stuff than cheaper stuff. They make better margins. This whole behavior,
Mm.
and plus, when a place sinks and doesn't survive the first year of life, there were statistics in Australia when I was still there, and we're
Hmm.
talking about 2017, 18, that
Hmm.
75% of businesses closed within the first year of activity and got up to 85 within 3 years. I saw places sold on Gumtree for $10,000 that are brand new
Oh,
Synesso
it's
in it,
brutal.
uh, and all the equipment. Was a person that got it, didn't know how to run it, then resold everything, made $10,000 out of it,
Yeah.
and then there was a good operator that knew how to run the cafe that got it for 10,000. That
Yeah.
guy will be profitable because his initial costs are very low.
Right.
But I don't want to be generic on this. I just want to say that the things you need to look at, because I want to make this podcast valuable for people that are listening, in terms of giving them ideas or things that they should look at. There are very few business books written on coffee. Colin Harmon wrote one that was based on his experience, and as far as not being too perfect, it does have a few drops of wisdom in it. Businesses need to look at how, given that there are many people out there that open coffee shops or could open coffee shops next to you. In Italy, it gave that every linear 100 meters of distance from each other, there was a coffee shop at a certain point.
Wow.
Too many. There was a way to find a job. When you didn't find a job, what you did, you went to a roaster, you found a place for rent, and you opened a coffee shop at a certain point. That's not the case anymore. There are a few places that survive, because when you rent and you get the roaster subsidizing you for your business, obviously you don't have a very strong business model. You own pretty much nothing, and you're just trying to make some cash to live. I've seen many of the situations in Italy, a lot less of that in Australia, for instance, and you see a lot less of that if you go to the US, for instance, or to other places. But the failure of these places is a massive cost for our industry. That's why when the roaster loses that kind of account because they closed, they're not able to operate, and they've been subsidizing them, the machine manufacturer doesn't get paid, or they get paid months later sometimes. So there is the failure rate of coffee shops is a problem for the whole supply chain in the end. It's the delivering point, but it's a cost. It's a cost that is implicit sometimes. It's a cost that has been accepted, and that's how things are. Well, I don't think necessarily that should be the case, because we need to give tools for people that want to open coffee shops that are serious. Like, the industry is a new phase. As you said, we had pandemic, we have an economic crisis in some countries, we have a social crisis. Our relationship with our consumers, as we've never been good at understanding what consumer wanted. So what we did as an industry, the specialty coffee industry, we started by patronizing them, making them not feel good enough. Because that was our way to approach them. So you're not good enough for me. And so you just shut up, sit there for 10 minutes while I make your coffee.
And you'll drink what I want you to drink, not what you want to drink.
And I'll incinerate you. Well, I found that, I've been all over the world in different cafes, and there were some very nice experiences, but there were also those kind, we're obviously exaggerating in this case, but there were a lot of people that were behaving like that, precisely, mostly because they didn't have training on how to sometimes nobody's teaching hospitality. Everyone is teaching, one of the key things is find a way to create a minimum level of service shared across your staff, because that's the biggest problem. We're all human. We all work in a very similar way. Then culture could come in the way. But the reality is that we all want a good coffee. We're in the business of flavor, as I say. You can buy coffee for caffeine, just to wake up in the morning and be on the go. And you need to be able to tell which customer wants that, if you're in the service industry, from the one that is looking for an experience and flavor. Those are the two drivers for which we spend money. And they both could relate to specialty coffee, although I think specialty coffee relates more to flavor than caffeine. But there could be also that. Consumers don't know what we know. We don't have to expect them to know what we know. And we need to be able to tell. So service, it's a major, that being nice to people, and the art to serve is very consuming, emotionally consuming. Being a good person in that space, it's difficult, because it's like an emotional exchange that lasts 8 hours. And nobody can do that.
Yeah.
So you need to create a standard. You need to really think through that. That's one key factor that I see many coffee shops not doing.
But they'll send their staff for Q grading. This is the part that drives me mental, is that they're not focusing on the fundamentals of teaching their staff how to provide an experience, which, in all honesty, that's what's going to bring you profitability. That's what's going to keep your customers coming back again and again and again and again. Not if you can describe the difference between a finger lime and key lime pie in acidity. Like, that's not what your customers care about. Your customers care about, does this person know how to welcome me into their establishment? Does this person know when to not talk to me? Does this person how to read the situation?
Look, people are people. And what I find is that when you have a staff of, what is particularly difficult for coffee shop owners, when you have a staff made of 10 people, you'll have one or two or more that are not as good as, because you'll have a mix. You'll have the good ones, you have the average ones, and the ones that really are not because they don't want to be. It's just nobody has ever taken time, and nobody knows what to teach either. It's not that they don't know.
We don't have
someone
standards.
in the business knows. There are no standards on hospitality, and it's interesting how that works today. And I think that's going to be the major focus of our industry in the future. Because what I was saying is, baristas, we were the coolest thing on the planet. Specialty coffee was the new thing. We were the messiahs of flavor, telling everyone what they should drink. Now, specialty coffee has massified. We are in the stage of massification of this space, which is more people want it. During the pandemic, a lot of people have started with online subscription, started to drink coffee at home. They got used to new food. And the good thing about human beings is once they get used to better, they can't go back to worse. We can't. It takes a huge shift in our lives to make us go back to worse. We would compromise a lot of things, but especially when it's a small expenditure in our day compared to other things that cost us, we would not go to worse coffee. Actually, during crisis, consumption of coffee usually goes up rather than down.
Well, it did in the pandemic. It went much higher than what it was pre-pandemic. You would assume that people would be drinking just the same amount of coffee, but it shifted. It shifted much higher, and it shifted the whole business model of our industry. And another thing that was really interesting is that the cafe became a lot of people's focus for their day, where it wasn't before. They would be at home working, they would be at home taking care of their families, and the only place they were really allowed to go was out to their cafe to grab a takeaway coffee, if they were going to be consuming coffee at a cafe at all. Otherwise, they'd brew at home. Yeah,
but the category is not just coffee that grew. It's specialty coffee that grew within coffee. Specialty coffee and specialty home equipment to brew it.
Yeah.
They had the biggest growth in years. So it represented a huge opportunity, for instance, for roasters. But it also created a detachment between what we could call food service. You know, if we want to divide the industry, the channels of distribution of coffee, there is retail, so supermarkets, of different kinds, distribution, the GDO, as we call it in Europe. Then you have online, that became a big factor. And then you have food service, which are cafes, restaurants, and everything, hotels. The food service business got a huge hit during the pandemic because between closures and everything, and all the models that were created to serve customers. In Australia, that wasn't perceived as much because there are lots of cafes that are window for takeaway. In Italy, no cafe has that. No cafes have that available. There? So you had to walk in there, they had to shut down. They had to be closed because there were limitations in distances and everything. So just understand the architecture of a cafe, how much impacts, for instance. So Australian cafes were already designed for that for other reasons, but they could keep a lower staff, their operation running. Then the staff part, in terms of them going away, the aviation industry, the food service industry lost a massive amount of people that are not set to come back, and that's another
another
how do you
episode,
attract
which
them?
we're going to talk.
Because that's no, because when you asked the question about profitability today, to go back to the initial question, there are so many factors affecting your profitability today.
100%.
Some are external, and they are cost of energy in some countries, and they can't really be managed. So you got to know that you got to have something that has to survive that, because eventually it might happen random, but there are random crises that could happen. We need to get used to operate a business in times of crisis. So we need to shape it in a different way, where number one, we differentiate our revenue streams as much as we can. We need to think the architecture, physical and business-wise, of our business to be able to cater to many different channels. And that's number one. Secondly, we need to differentiate ourselves also from the others next to us. Because otherwise we don't create that relationship with consumers. Cost of rent, it's a major factor. Transportation now has increased everything. Cost of packaging, everything is going up very rapidly. So you need to have, if you want to open today, you need to have a very sound, tested project in mind, where you say, okay, let's look at fixed costs. Fixed cost, how do I manage my fixed cost? It's what I need to take with me through any time.
Yeah, when I'm selling nothing or selling millions of products.
Fixed cost is the main focus. So fixed cost is anything you can't change according to things. I would recommend that the fixed cost is keeping at the lowest as possible right now. So if you want to open, but keep your fixed cost low and build on it, but try to make your business as modular and differentiated as you can. And when you're talking about a business, to make a business sustainable, talking about modularity of a business is very hard, because, but you could create alliances, you could create partnerships, you could create things that allow you to shift attention and focus from one to the other without overcommitting.
Well, you could, you could go from brick and mortar while also having an online business, so that you can modulate that way as necessary and required, right?
Yeah, the old roasters have started to sell online, and without, I think that's the other part, is that the investment I would recommend and the focus should be about what I call I didn't invent this term, but I like it. It's called physical digital.
Oh, I like that.
Continuity between the two spaces.
Yeah.
The phygital space is the businesses that are succeeding the most right now are the ones that are able to create a link, an emotional link with their customers that starts in the place but continues outside of it in the digital space, so that the consumer can enjoy that kind of experience in a limited form wherever they are. If they're at home, they still have a relationship with what you do. The businesses that are thriving the most right now, because let's say it, the fact that the energy cost is going up, the fact that rent is going up,
commodities are going up, all of it.
What I'm saying is everything is going to go up, but not every business will close because of that. We're not going to predict. We're not predicting apocalypse or anything. But there are things you need to do. No, I don't believe it.
We're seeing it here already, Cosimo.
I'm a Japanese philosophy.
Okay.
I see every threat is an opportunity. That's what I think.
I like that. The thing
contains an opportunity. Let's say.
And my big, and And this sets us up beautifully for the next episode, which is talking about the barriers to entry with regards to profitability. Because when these threats present themselves, we've got one way of looking at this. This is going to destroy me, or how do I solve problems and monetize those problems for my customers? And the thing that I've seen in our industry in the 20 years that I've been in it is that people continue to try and reinvent the wheel. And that's not going to cut it anymore. You know, trying to get famous, enter WBC, then go and open a cafe and then just expect it to be profitable because you're famous seems to be a dead-end kind of trajectory these days, because it's just not working the way that it used to work. But we'll talk about it in the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's marketing in a way.
Right.
Let's call it marketing. It can be done in 1,000 different ways, not just through WBC. You could buy the most expensive lots of coffee and just make the news for that. You can. Yeah. It worked for a certain period of time when we were the cool people.
Right, but not so much anymore.
No, but consumers never bought into that. The reality is that when I was living, you know, at the end of my time in Australia a few years ago in 2018, I could already see people buying less coffee in cafes. I had stats about the whole industry in Australia, and going to rather 7-Eleven to buy a coffee because they were annoyed by the attitude of people. There were a lot of consumers shifting to a worse type of coffee just to have to put up with the experience, not have to put up with the experience that we're having in cafes. And that's sort of, we kind of did it to ourselves, but that's when
100%.
We don't create a model based on hospitality, because specialty and hospitality should be the same thing. Special experience rather than just good coffee or special coffee.
Well, and that's why
we put too much to focus on the product and not on the experience that we give to people, which should be have good product behind it. I mean, that should be the basis. But I think, and that's where rent and everything, if you rethink the model based on the hospitality experience that you get, because sometimes having a big space with tables sitting down and having to be nice. Oh, think about a barista that has to, we ask baristas a lot. We ask baristas to be perfect and deliver with a smile, smiles included in the price. And it's impossible for anyone to be in a good mood 8 hours a day. It's impossible for everyone to be nice, even to some type of consumer.
5 days a week on top of
that.
There
are not 5 days a day. So what you need to create is tailor an experience for really think through the experience you're giving to consumers. I was in London recently at Rustlin, and Rustlin has no plugs it's a place that has no seating, no plugs, a bit like Patricia. The reason why Patricia in Melbourne works, one of the reasons, not that but one of the reasons is that they're able to have a positive interaction, be nice, be kind, serve you a cup of coffee, and you go.
And you move.
You don't spend too much time there.
No.
You don't spend. There is no space for you. You don't even blame them for that because they don't have space. So
they align your expectations from the space they've created.
You know what you're going to get from the
100%.
moment you walk in the door. Great coffee, and you stay aside if you want and chat with people. But the staff is not required to be with you. I see smaller coffee shops that are very good at doing few things and that they have online presence of some kind where they maybe create delivery or doing better than the big ones, where you serve a massive breakfast, where you have a very complicated menu, where you have things. Those will struggle more because rent will be higher, cost of energy will be higher. So that's one of the things that I see. There's going to be a polarization. So either you have a system behind those shops. They're part of also the polarization we're seeing in the industry, where the big shops keep happening, but they're also run by bigger companies that have specialized resources that are also shared with other businesses in the group. So they differentiate their costs across different entities. And that's where the biggest shops are going to transition. You're going to start seeing chains of specialty shops growing in the future. This is my prediction. If I was a mom and pop shop, I would really think on how to create that link with the customers based on a very well thought service and low capital investment, low rent, low energy use. I wouldn't go into a massive location. And that's what I was saying, because when you say these things, we say a lot of recipes that are very theoretical. And when you explain to someone that wants to open a business, you should be doing that. I love consultants. I'm one of them. I find them sometimes not being very practical about things.
Yep.
So
and there is no one size fits all in this industry at all.
No, but what you see is that I've seen it in London when I was there. It's interesting how many chains of coffee shops that started during the good times as one coffee shop, then they became two, then they became three. Now they're becoming roasters.
Well, that's the only avenue left.
Well, it's the opposite, because they are now roasting for themselves in order to control that part of the cost, but they're starting to wholesale as well, so that they differentiate channels. The pandemic, but in Australia, when I was there, it was the opposite. Roasters having flagships to market their coffee.
Right.
So you started as a roaster, and then you opened the cafe. To show your customers how it was done, to feature your coffees. This is in London. It was so interesting to see the opposite. But the larger cafes will be a space owned by mini specialty chains that will naturally require a lot of capital and will require differentiation of resources behind it, so that you have a team in HR or a team in finance that manages all cafes once. So you control other sides of your cost that you're externalizing. You bring them in, but you have a much higher volume that you can manage. So you make a profit not in one cafe, but across 100 cafes. And that's when you make it sustainable, because the impact of certain costs on scale lowers, and you offset some of the other costs. But I mean, not that everybody that does that is going to be successful, but also the business sense of people that have that size is they can acquire more talent in managing finance, in managing in management. They get, the skill set they can get in. If you have a cafe, you can't hire someone that costs you $150K a year, right? So that's where we're seeing this condensation on the larger, and that's why the massification, more consumers demanding, requesting it, will generate more capital coming in. And so specialty, it's really polarizing between the small operators and the bigger ones. But the small can be as successful by doing 3-4 things right, creating an online connection with their customers, and try to use the least amount of space possible, but with smiles. The big chains are going to have a hard time doing that because of their type of service. Either they have a lot of staff on rotation, so they rotate stuff much faster in terms of during the day having different shifts, or it will be difficult to keep that standard. So that's the point of differentiation for the small operators.
It's going to be interesting. In the next episode, what we're going to talk about is those barriers to entry and barriers to profitability. And we're going to expand on that a little bit more. And that's going to be interesting to explore with you. Let's do that. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.